The warlord hurt a human's dog, and he did not understand why the whole galaxy went cold and quiet around him, the way a room goes quiet when someone has done a thing so far past forgiveness that no one knows what to say. He thought he had stepped on an animal. He did not understand that he had broken something sacred, something the galaxy did not even have a word for until the humans taught us one, and that the breaking of it would cost him everything, not because the humans took their revenge, but because of what the humans did instead, which was so much worse and so much more humbling than revenge could ever have been. I am Reth, and I served in the court of Warlord Kassar of the Drevish Ascendancy, and I was there when he crossed the line with the human's dog, and I watched what came after, and it changed me into someone who can no longer look at my own people the way I used to. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you about the dog and the human, and the thing my people did not understand until it was far too late. The thing about humans and the creatures they love that the whole galaxy got catastrophically, shamefully wrong. You have to understand the Drevish first, and how we saw the galaxy, because the warlord's mistake was not just his. It was all of ours. The Drevish Ascendancy was a hard, proud, martial people, and we measured everything by strength and use. Every creature, every person, everything had a place in a hierarchy of usefulness, and a thing that was not useful was a thing of no value to be discarded or ignored. We did not keep companions. We did not form bonds with creatures weaker than ourselves. The very idea would have struck us as absurd, a weakness, a waste. An animal to a Drevish was a tool or a meal or a pest, a thing valued only for what it could do, and worthless the moment it could do nothing. I want to show you how deep this ran because the depth of it is the measure of how badly we failed to see. A Drevish parent did not say to a Drevish child, "I love you." A Drevish parent said, "You are strong, you are useful, you bring honor to the line." Worth was earned always through use and strength, and a thing that could not earn its worth had none. We applied this to everything. To our tools, which we discarded when they broke, to our animals, which we worked until they could not work and then disposed of without a thought, even in the cold logic of our culture, to our own weak and our own old, who were honored only for what they had been useful for, and pitied faintly for having become useless. We had no concept of loving a creature for its own sake, of valuing a being that could give you nothing in return, of forming a bond across the line between species with something that would never be your equal. Such a thing was not in us. It was not a thing we had decided against. It was a thing we did not have, a color we could not see, a sense we had been born without. And it was not just us. I want to be fair to my own people by being honest about the galaxy. The cold calculus of usefulness ruled most of the older species, not as harshly as it ruled the Drevish, but it ruled them. The idea of pouring real devotion into a weak and useless creature, of loving something that could never repay the love, was foreign to nearly all of the galaxy's peoples. We were a galaxy that understood alliance and advantage and the bonds of mutual use, and that did not understand, had never understood, the thing that humans did. Because the humans loved. And humans, it turned out, did the one thing the galaxy could not understand. They loved across the line. Not just each other, every species loves its own, in some fashion. Even the Drevish, in our cold way, were bound to our own kind. Humans were different in a way that took the galaxy years to even perceive, because it was so far outside our categories. Humans formed deep, real, unbreakable bonds with creatures of other species, creatures that could not speak, could not reason as they did, could give them nothing of use, would never be their equals, and they loved these creatures not for any use but simply, purely, for themselves. They called some of these creatures pets, a word that does not translate, that the galaxy first heard as something trivial, a possession, a kept thing, a toy, and only later, far too late, understood as something closer to family. Humans shared their homes with these creatures, spent their resources on them freely, asking nothing back, grieved them when they died with a grief as real as any they felt for their own kind. spoke of them as members of their families, mourned them, remembered them, carried their loss for years. The galaxy observed all this and filed it under human sentimentality, the soft foolishness of a species that, for all its frightening strength, wasted its heart on useless things. We thought it was a weakness. We genuinely thought it was a weakness. The way you think a thing is a weakness when you are too poor in spirit to recognize it as the richest thing there is. And the chief of these bonds, the oldest and deepest of all the bonds humans formed across the line, was the bond between a human and a creature they called a dog. I have learned since about dogs, learned more than I ever wanted to know, because learning it was part of my education in what we destroyed. Dogs and humans had been bound together for longer than human history, for tens of thousands of their years, so long that the two species had shaped each other, had grown up together, had become two halves of a single ancient partnership. A dog was not a pet the way the galaxy understood pets. A dog was something humans had loved for so long that the love had become part of what both species were. To a human, a dog was loyalty given form, love that asked nothing, a being that would die for you and wanted only to be near you, the single most uncomplicated and unconditional bond a human could have in a complicated and conditional world. The galaxy looked at a human and a dog and saw a person and an animal. We could not have been more wrong. We were looking at the oldest love story either species had, and we were too cold to even see that it was a love story at all. The human's name was Sergeant Mara Idawu, and she had come to the Drevish court as part of a diplomatic delegation, a human military officer, attached to an embassy, here to negotiate some matter of trade or borders that does not matter to this story. What matters is that she did not come alone. She brought her dog. His name was Bear. He was not a large creature, a medium-sized dog, brown and white, with one ear that flopped and one that stood, with the particular gentle steadiness that some dogs have, a calm in him that seemed to settle a room. And he went everywhere with Sergeant Idawu, and the court found this endlessly strange. A human warrior accompanied at all times by a useless brown animal that did nothing, as far as we could see, but follow her and watch her and lean against her leg when she stood still. We did not understand that Bear was not just a pet, even by human standards. We learned later, too late, always too late, that Bear was a service animal, a working dog, trained for a specific and sacred purpose. Sergeant Idawu, we learned, carried wounds from her years of war that were not all visible, wounds of the mind and the spirit, the kind that war leaves in those who survive it, the kind that can wake a soldier screaming or pull them down into dark places years after the fighting stops. And Bear had been trained to stand between her and those wounds, to sense when the darkness was coming for her and interrupt it, to wake her from the nightmares, to press his weight against her when she shook, to ground her when her mind tried to drag her back to the war, to be the steady living anchor that kept her tethered to the present when her own mind became her enemy. Bear was, in a real and literal sense, part of how Sergeant Idawu stayed whole. He was not her property. He was her partner. He was the creature who stood guard over her soul, who did every day the quiet work of keeping a wounded warrior from being destroyed by her own wounds. And she loved him with a depth that the Drevish court, watching, mistook for foolish sentiment. I watched them together in the days of the negotiations, and even I, a cold Drevish courtier, born without the sense to see such things, even I could see, if I was honest, that there was something between the human and the dog that I did not have a category for. The way Bear watched her constantly with a soft total attention, as if she were the most important thing in the universe, which to him she was. The way she touched his head absently in moments of stress and visibly steadied, her shoulders dropping, her breathing easing, the tension going out of her at the simple contact. The way they moved together, two beings so attuned to each other that they seemed almost one creature in two bodies. Once during a tense moment in the talks, I saw Bear get up without any command and press himself against her leg, and I saw her hand drop to his head, and I saw something pass between them, some wordless reassurance, some "I'm here," and I saw her steady and continue, stronger for it. I did not understand what I was seeing, but I saw that it was real and that it was deep, and a wiser people than mine would have seen it and understood that here was something not to be touched, something sacred, something that to break would be to break the human herself. Warlord Kassar was not a wiser people than mine. Warlord Kassar was the embodiment of everything cold and proud and blind in the Drevish, distilled and concentrated, a being who had risen to power precisely because he felt nothing he could not use and valued nothing he could not dominate. And the negotiations had not been going the way Kassar wanted. The humans had negotiated firmly, from strength, refusing to be bullied, and Kassar, who understood the world only through dominance, had grown frustrated, had begun to look for a way to assert Drevish superiority over these soft, sentimental humans who would not yield. He looked at Sergeant Idawu, strong and unbowed across the negotiating table, and he looked for the soft place, the weak place, the place where he could hurt her and prove that Drevish strength could break human softness. And his cold, blind eyes found bare the useless brown animal, the soft attachment, the thing the human inexplicably cared about, and he thought, I know he thought because I knew him, there is the weakness. I will show her and the whole human delegation what the Drevish think of the things you love. I will hurt the animal and she will break, and they will all see that human softness cannot stand against Drevish strength. He thought he was going to win the negotiation by hurting a dog. He thought he was making a hard, shrewd, dominant move. He thought he was kicking aside a piece of furniture to make a point. He had no idea, none, not the faintest conception, that he was about to do the single most catastrophic thing any being had done in the galaxy in a generation, and that he was about to do it in front of witnesses, and that the witnesses would include the entire watching galaxy, and that nothing in the Drevish Ascendancy would survive it. I will not describe in detail what Warlord Kassar did to Bear, because it does not need describing and because some things should not be dwelt on. I will tell you only the shape of it, that during a moment of calculated tension in the negotiations, to make a point about Drevish strength and human weakness, to show the human delegation that the Drevish did not respect their soft attachments, Warlord Kassar harmed the dog, deliberately, cruelly, in front of Sergeant Idawu and the whole court, as a demonstration. This is what we think of the things you love. He hurt Bear badly, gravely, the kind of harm a creature might not survive. And he did it with the casual contempt of a being who genuinely believed he was doing nothing more significant than breaking a tool to intimidate its owner. The court went silent, not, I am ashamed to say, out of horror at the cruelty. Most of the Drevish court did not yet understand that anything significant had happened. They went silent because they were watching the human, waiting to see how she would react to this demonstration of Drevish dominance, expecting perhaps anger, perhaps tears, perhaps the satisfying collapse of human softness in the face of Drevish strength. There was even, I am ashamed to remember, a kind of anticipation in the hall, the ugly anticipation of a cruel court waiting to watch a strong opponent be broken through the thing she loved. What they saw instead was something none of them had a frame for, and it began the education of the entire galaxy. Sergeant Mara Idawu did not scream, she did not rage, she did not collapse. She went very, very still, the kind of stillness that is more frightening than any fury, the stillness of something vast and terrible gathering itself, the stillness of deep water before a great wave. And for one moment, one held breath of a moment, the whole hall felt the temperature of the room change, felt something enormous and dangerous wake up in the still human soldier. And even Kassar, I think, felt the first cold touch of the understanding that he had made a mistake. And then she moved, but not toward Kassar, she went a bear. She crossed the hall and knelt beside her dog, and she gathered his broken body into her arms with a tenderness that filled the cold Drevish hall like a sound, a tenderness so total, and so unguarded that it silenced even the cruel anticipation of the court, because you cannot watch love like that and keep your cruelty. The love showed up the cruelty for what it was, in front of everyone. And she began, quietly, with shaking hands and a steady voice, to work to save his life. Because Bear was not dead. Gravely hurt, dying perhaps, but not dead, and Sergeant Idaho, a soldier with a soldier's hard training in keeping the wounded alive, turned the whole of herself to the task of keeping her dog breathing, there on the floor of the Drevish Hall, in front of the warlord who had hurt him. She did not waste a single moment on Kassar, did not look at him, did not speak to him, did not spare him so much as a glance, because in that moment the warlord did not exist for her. Nothing existed for her but the dying creature in her arms and the desperate, loving, ferocious work of saving him. She talked to Bear the whole time. I could hear her, low and steady, the way you talk to someone you are refusing to let die. Stay with me, buddy. Come on, stay with me. You're okay. I've got you. I'm not letting you go. Stay with me, Bear. Please stay with me. The same words I would later learn that he had spent years saying to her in his way on her worst nights. Stay with me. I've got you. I'm not letting you go. Now she said them to him. And it was in watching her do that, watching a human soldier kneel on a cold hall floor and pour the whole of her formidable being into saving the life of a creature my people considered worthless, that I, Reth, first began to understand the size of what Warlord Kassar had done. Because you do not look like that, do not move like that, do not pour yourself out like that, for a possession, for a tool, for a thing of mere use. You look like that only for someone you love beyond measure. And I realized, watching Sergeant Idaho fight for Bear's life, that I was not watching a human upset about an animal. I was watching a human whose family had just been mortally wounded in front of her, fighting to save the life of someone she loved more than her own self, and that my warlord in his cold, proud blindness had done a thing far more terrible than he could possibly comprehend, had reached into the chest of a wounded warrior and crushed the one thing that kept her whole, and had done it laughing, thinking it a clever move in a negotiation. She stabilized him, somehow with her own field medicine and the human delegation's medical supplies that her people rushed to bring, and the sheer refusal to let him go. Sergeant Idaho kept Bear alive, got him breathing steadily, got him stable enough to be moved to the human ship's far better medical facilities, where, she was told, he had a chance. Not a certainty. A chance. Her dog would live or die in the coming days, and no one could say which, and she would have to wait and hope, the way humans hope, which is to say with the whole of themselves. And only then, only once her dog was no longer dying in her arms, only once she had done everything that could be done to save him, did she stand up, slowly, Bear's blood on her hands and her uniform, and turn, and look at Warlord Kassar for the first time since he had crossed the line. I was watching her face. I will never forget it as long as I live. There was no rage in it. That was the thing that frightened me more than rage ever could have. Rage I would have understood. Rage is hot and human, and it burns out. There was grief in her face, vast and terrible and bottomless. And there was something else, something colder and steadier and infinitely more dangerous than anger. There was resolve. The look of a person who has had something sacred broken in front of her, and who has decided with absolute and total clarity that there will be a reckoning, not a hot reckoning of fury, but a cold, patient, complete reckoning, the kind that does not burn out, the kind that does not forget, the kind that does not stop until it is finished. And she said one thing to Warlord Kassar, quietly in the silent hall, with her dog's blood on her hands, before she carried Bear out to her ship. She said, "You don't understand what you just did. You think you hurt an animal. You think you made a clever move. You have no idea what you've done, none, because you're too cold to even see it. But you're going to understand, not because I'm going to hurt you. I'm not going to lay a single hand on you, Kassar. That would be too easy and too kind, and it would let you off. No, I'm going to do something so much worse. I'm going to show the whole galaxy what Bear is, what he was to me, what you did to him, and what that makes you. I'm going to make every being in this galaxy understand the thing you were too cold to understand, And when they understand, when they finally see what you did here today, you won't need me to punish you. The whole galaxy will do it for me. Not with weapons. With something you can't fight and can't dominate and can't survive. They're going to understand. And they're going to be ashamed they ever called you strong. And she carried her dog out of the hall, his blood marking her path across the cold Drevish floor. And Warlord Kassar laughed, because he still did not understand. And I did not laugh, because I was beginning to. And what I was beginning to understand was making me sick with a shame I did not yet have a name for, the shame of a being who has just realized that the thing his whole people called weakness was the best thing in the galaxy, and that they had just destroyed it, laughing, in front of everyone. Sergeant Idaho kept her promise, and the way she kept it was the most devastating thing I have ever witnessed, because she did exactly what she said she would do, and not one thing more. She did not hurt Kassar. She did not raise a hand against the Drevish. She simply made the galaxy understand, and the understanding did to Kassar what no army in the galaxy could have done. Here is how she did it. She did not give a speech. She did not demand justice. She did the thing humans do that the galaxy was only beginning to learn to fear. She told the truth simply and let the truth do the work. She released to the human worlds and then to the wider galaxy, to anyone who would receive it, the full record of what had happened in the Drevish Hall. Not edited for outrage, not shaped into propaganda, just the truth. What Bear was, what he did for her. Humara Idaho was a soldier who had given years to war and come home carrying wounds, and the dog who had been trained to keep those wounds from destroying her. And what Warlord Kassar had done to that dog, deliberately, cruelly, as a move in a negotiation, to demonstrate that the Drevish did not respect the things humans loved. And then she let the galaxy look at it. That was all. She let the galaxy look at the truth of what a dog is to a human, and at the truth of what Kassar had done, and she trusted, correctly, that once the galaxy truly understood, the rest would take care of itself. I have to tell you what happened in the galaxy when it understood, because it was not what any Drevish expected, and it taught me everything. We had expected, if we expected anything, that the galaxy would shrug, that the other cold species would see a warlord hurt an animal to make a point in a negotiation, and find it unremarkable, the ordinary hardness of power, nothing to concern themselves with. That is what would have happened a generation before humanity. The galaxy's old coldness would have looked at a hurt animal and seen nothing worth caring about. But humanity had been in the galaxy for a while now, and humanity had been quietly teaching the galaxy something, without anyone quite noticing, teaching it, by example, what it looked like to love across the line. The other species had watched humans with their dogs and their cats and their companions for years now, had seen the depth of those bonds, had begun, slowly, some of them, to understand. And more than that, humanity's example had begun to wake something in the other species, something that had perhaps always been there, dormant, beneath the cold calculus of usefulness. The capacity to love a creature for its own sake, which it turned out was not unique to humans, but had simply never been given permission, in most of the galaxy's cultures, to exist. Humans had shown the galaxy that it was allowed to love the weak and the useless and the beloved. And quietly, in homes across the galaxy, other species had begun to do it too, to take in companions, to form bonds across the line, to discover the thing they had been too cold to know they were missing. So when Sergeant Idaho released the truth of what Kassar had done, it did not land on a cold galaxy that would shrug. It landed on a galaxy that had, thanks to humans, just barely learned to understand, and the understanding was total, and the revulsion was total, and it spread like fire. Because here is the thing about the truth Idaho released. Once you understood what Bear was, you could not ununderstand it, and once you understood it, what Kassar had done became unforgivable. The galaxy looked at the record, and it did not see a warlord hurt an animal. It saw a wounded soldier and the creature who guarded her soul. It saw a being that had asked nothing and given everything, a love that was pure in a way the galaxy was starved for, and it saw that love deliberately, cruelly broken by a cold, proud being who thought he was being clever. And every person in the galaxy who had ever loved a companion across the line, and there were more of them now, so many more, because of humans. Every one of them looked at what Kassar had done to Bear and felt it as if it had been done to their own beloved companion, and the feeling was horror, and the horror was universal. The galaxy turned on Kassar. Not with weapons, Idaho had been right about that, had wanted that, had engineered it. With something worse, with moral revulsion, with the cold, total, isolating contempt of a whole galaxy that has decided you are beneath contempt. The other powers, who might have allied with the Drevish, would not touch them now. The trade that the Ascendancy depended on began to wither, as world after world refused to deal with the people whose warlord had done that. The Drevish, who had measured everything by strength, discovered that there was something stronger than strength, and that they had put themselves on the wrong side of it. The moral judgment of a galaxy that had just learned from humans what was sacred, and had just watched the Drevish desecrate it, laughing. Kassar had wanted to demonstrate Drevish strength. He had instead demonstrated to the entire galaxy Drevish poverty, the coldness, the blindness, the inability to see the most precious thing in front of him. And a galaxy that had just learned to value that precious thing looked at the Drevish and saw, not a strong people to be feared, but a poor and broken people to be pitied and shunned, a people missing the thing that made the rest of them whole. The Ascendancy began to collapse, not militarily, but morally, economically, diplomatically, isolated and shamed into ruin, by the revulsion of a galaxy that would no longer pretend that Drevish coldness was strength. And all the while, Bear was fighting to live, and the galaxy was watching that too, and I think the watching of it was what completed the galaxy's transformation. Because Idaho did not hide her vigil. She let the galaxy see that too, a soldier sitting beside the medical bed of her dog, day after day, waiting to learn whether he would live, doing the thing humans do, which is to refuse to leave the bedside of someone they love, to be there present for every hour of the fight, so that the loved one is never alone. The galaxy watched a hardened warrior sit beside a wounded dog and hold his paw and talk to him through the long nights, the way he had sat beside her through her long nights, and the galaxy understood, watching, the full shape of what it was seeing. Not a human and an animal, but two beings who had spent years keeping each other alive, taking turns at the bedside, and now it was her turn, and she was keeping it the way he always had. I watched it too. I could not stop watching it. I, a cold Drevish courtier who had been born without the sense to see such things, sat in the ruins of my warlord's collapsing court and watched a human keep vigil beside her dog. And I felt, for the first time in my life, the thing my people had never let themselves feel, felt how much she loved him, felt the size of it, felt what it would mean to her to lose him, and felt, underneath all of it, a grief of my own. Grief for my whole people, who had lived our entire cold history without ever once feeling a love like that, who had called it weakness, who had been so poor in spirit that we had destroyed it without even knowing what it was. I grieved for Bear, who might die. And I grieved for the Drevish, who had never learned to love anything they could not use, and who were only now discovering, in our isolation and our shame, the size of the thing we had been missing. I went as Sergeant Idaho during the vigil. I do not fully know why. I was a Drevish courtier of the warlord who had hurt her dog. I had no right to her presence. But I had to say something, had to be something other than another cold Drevish face, had to let her know that at least one of us had understood. I found her beside Bear's medical bed, exhausted, her hand resting on the sleeping dog's side, feeling him breathe. "I'm sorry," I said. "It was inadequate. I knew it was inadequate. I'm Drevish. I served Kassar. I have no right to be here. But I have to tell you I understand now. What Bear is, what he did for you, what Kassar took. I didn't before. My people are too cold to see it. We're raised not to be able to see it. But I see it now. And I'm so ashamed of him, of my whole people, of myself. For all the years I looked at love like yours and called it weakness. It was never weakness. It was the thing we were missing. I'm sorry. I had to tell you that someone understood." And Sergeant Idaho looked at me, tired, grieving, her hand on her dog, and she did a thing I did not expect, a thing that taught me the last piece of what humans are. She was not cruel to me. She had every right to be cruel to me, a courtier of the being who had broken her heart, and she was not. She said, "Thank you. That actually means a lot, that someone here saw him for what he was." She looked down at Bear. "That's all I ever wanted out of this, honestly, not to hurt anybody, just for people to understand, to see what Kassar couldn't see, what your people couldn't see. Because if they understand, then it never happens again to anybody's. Bear. That's the only thing worth getting out of something this awful, that people understand, so it stops." She stroked the dog's side. "He's a good boy. He kept me alive for 6 years. I'm just trying to keep him alive now. That's all this ever was." And I understood, hearing that even her reckoning, the thing that was destroying my whole people, was not vengeance. It was teaching. She was not trying to punish the galaxy or even Kassar. She was trying to make the galaxy understand, so that no one's beloved companion would ever be broken like this again. And the destruction of the Drevish was simply what happened when a galaxy finally understood what the Drevish had done. She had not weaponized anything. She had only told the truth and kept vigil by her dog, and the truth and the love had done everything else, because the truth and the love were the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and the Drevish had stood against them, and the Drevish were losing. Bear lived. I will tell you that first, because I made you carry the fear with me through 2 parts, and I will not make you carry it any longer. The dog who guarded a soldier's soul, who was hurt so gravely on the floor of a cold Drevish hall, fought his way back across days that hung on the edge of a knife, and he lived. I was there. Idaho let me stay, an act of grace I did not deserve. When he opened his eyes and found her face, when his tail moved weakly just once at the sight of her, and when Sergeant Mara Idaho, hardened soldier, broke completely, finally, the tears she had held through all of it coming at last, and pressed her forehead to her dog's and wept and said, good boy, you stayed with me, you stayed." And I, a Drevish courtier who had been born without the sense to weep for such things, wept too, in the corner of that medical bay, for a brown dog with one floppy ear who had decided to live, and for everything his living meant. He lived. And his living was the beginning of the galaxy's healing and the deepest part of the reckoning, because the galaxy had been holding its breath along with Idaho, and when Bear lived, the galaxy let out that breath as one, and in the letting out it understood fully at last what it had nearly lost, and what the Drevish had nearly taken, and what it had so long been too cold to value. Now let me tell you what the title of this story means, because it is the truest part and the most surprising. The galaxy is begging for forgiveness. You might think it means the Drevish begging Idaho's forgiveness for what their warlord did. And they did, eventually, in their collapse and their shame, the Drevish came to beg, and I will get to that. But that is not the deepest meaning. The deepest meaning is stranger and more beautiful, and I only understood it slowly. The galaxy, the whole galaxy, not just the Drevish, was begging forgiveness. Not of Idaho, of the thing she had made them understand. Because in the days when the truth spread and the galaxy finally comprehended what a dog is to a human, what love across the line actually means, the galaxy did not only turn on Kassar, it turned on itself. It looked back on its own long cold history, all those millennia of measuring worth by usefulness, of discarding the weak, of being too poor in spirit to love a creature for its own sake, and it was ashamed. Not of Kassar alone, of all of it, of every cold species that had ever looked at a human and a companion and seen sentiment and weakness, of the whole galaxy's long blindness to the most precious thing there was. And the galaxy, understanding at last, began to beg forgiveness, of every creature it had ever failed to love, of every weak and useless and beloved being it had discarded across its cold history, of the whole capacity for love across the line that it had denied itself for so long. The begging took the form of a great change. A galaxy suddenly opening its cold heart, suddenly taking in companions, suddenly learning the thing humans had been trying to teach it all along, that the measure of a people is not the strength of what they can dominate but the depth of what they can love, especially the weak, especially the useless, especially the ones who can give you nothing but themselves. The galaxy begged forgiveness of its own long coldness, and the begging was the most beautiful thing I ever saw, because it meant the galaxy was finally, after all those cold millennia, learning to love. Warlord Kassar fell. I will tell you how, because it matters that it was not violence. He fell because his own people turned away from him, and his own people turned away from him because the galaxy's revulsion had shown the Drevish, at last, what they had become, and because some of the Drevish, like me, having finally understood, would no longer follow a being who embodied the coldness that had isolated and shamed us. Kassar's strength, which had been the whole of his power, became worthless the moment the galaxy decided that his kind of strength was not strength at all but poverty. The trade collapsed, the alliances evaporated, the other powers shunned the ascendancy, and within the Drevish themselves a thing began to stir that had never stirred before: shame, and with the shame, the first faint beginnings of the thing we had always lacked. Kassar was deposed in the end by his own people, not in a coup of ambition, but in a kind of collective recoil, a people pulling away from the warlord who had shown the galaxy the worst of what they were. And the Drevish, this is the part I am proudest of, the part that gives me hope, the Drevish began to change. We had been shown in the most unbearable way the size of what we were missing, and a people who has truly seen what it lacks can sometimes, if it is not too proud, begin to grow it. The shame of what Kassar did became, for many Drevish, the beginning of an education, the same education I had received, watching Ide, who fight for Bear's life. We began, slowly, painfully, against the grain of our entire cold history, to learn to love across the line, to take in companions, to value a creature for its own sake, to discover, late and at terrible cost, the thing the humans had been trying to show the whole galaxy, that loving the weak and the useless and the beloved is not weakness but the richest strength there is, the thing that makes a cold people whole. I took in a companion myself after, a small creature of no use to anyone, that I loved for no reason except that it was itself and it was mine and it needed me. The old Reth would not have understood it. The new Reth understands that it is the best thing he ever did. I learned it from a human and her dog, on the worst day of my life, which turned out also to be the day I began to become a person worth being. The Drevish came to beg Idau's forgiveness, in the end a delegation of us, the changed ones, the ashamed ones, come to the human worlds to say what needed saying. And I was part of it, because it was right that the courtier who had first understood should be there when his people finally did. We did not make excuses. We told her the truth, that her warlord, our people, our coldness, had done a thing of unforgivable cruelty, and that we were ashamed, and that we had been changed by it, and that we were trying, all of us, to become the kind of people who could never do such a thing again. We did not ask her to forgive Kassar. He did not deserve it, and we did not ask it. We asked her to forgive us, the ones who were learning, the ones who were trying, and to let us show her that her teaching had taken, that the galaxy had understood, that Bear's suffering had not been meaningless because it had cracked open the cold heart of a whole galaxy and let the love in. And Sergeant Idau, with Bear at her side, healed now, older, one floppy ear and one standing, leaning against her leg the way he always had, Sergeant Idau forgave us. Of course she did. Because that is the last thing humans taught the galaxy, the thing underneath all the rest, that the same heart that can love a dog beyond all reason can also forgive a people beyond all deserving, if the people are truly trying to be better, because love and forgiveness are the same thing wearing two faces, and humans have more of both than the galaxy ever imagined possible. I forgive you, she said, Not him, he never asked, and I don't think he could understand it if I gave it, but you, the ones who changed. Yeah, I forgive you, that's the whole point of all of it. Bear got hurt so that a galaxy could learn to love. The least I can do is love the galaxy back enough to forgive it for taking so long. And she scratched Bear's ears, and the dog leaned into her hand, and a delegation of Drevish wept, openly, in front of a human and her dog, having finally learned how. I am old now, and I have a companion still, a different one. They are short-lived, the small creatures we love. That is part of the deal. You love them knowing you will lose them, and you love them anyway, which is itself a thing the humans taught us. And I have spent the back half of my life telling this story, because it is the most important thing that ever happened to me and to my people. I tell the young Drevish, who have grown up in the warm new world that the cold old one became. There was a time when we could not love. When we measured everything by use and discarded the weak, and looked at a human and her dog and saw only weakness. There was a time when a warlord of our own people hurt a human's dog and thought it was a clever move, because he was too cold to understand what he was doing. And I tell them how the galaxy changed, not because the humans took revenge, but because a human showed us the truth, and the truth was so beautiful and so shaming that a whole cold galaxy fell to its knees in front of it and begged to be allowed to learn. The galaxy is begging for forgiveness. That is the title of this story, and it is true, but it does not mean what you might think. It does not mean a galaxy cowering before human wrath. It means a galaxy on its knees before a thing it finally understood was sacred, ashamed of all the cold ages it spent unable to see it, begging of the dogs and the companions and the beloved useless creatures, and of its own long-denied capacity to love them, to be forgiven, and to be taught, and to be allowed at last to love. A warlord crossed the line with a human's dog. He thought he was demonstrating strength. He was demonstrating the one weakness that actually matters, the inability to love. And the human's answer was not to show him a greater strength, but to show the whole galaxy a greater love, the love of a soldier for the dog who guarded her soul, and that love did what no weapon could. It shamed the cold and it healed the cold both at once, and it left a galaxy on its knees, begging forgiveness and learning, finally, after all those cold millennia, how to love a creature for nothing but itself. Bear lived. He died eventually years later, old and gray and beloved in Idaho's arms, the way the ones we love do, and she grieved him the way humans grieve completely, and then, because this is the last thing humans taught us, she loved another after, because the answer to loss is not to stop loving but to love again, knowing it will cost you, because the love is worth the cost always, every time. That is the whole of it. That is what the humans taught a cold galaxy, through a brown dog with one floppy ear and the soldier who loved him. Love the weak. Love the useless. Love the ones who can give you nothing but themselves. It is the only thing that was ever worth doing. And it is the strongest thing in the galaxy, strong enough to bring an empire down, and strong enough to heal one, and strong enough to teach a whole cold galaxy, at last, how to feel. Good boy, Bear. You taught us all.